Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Spiritually Speaking. Today, I have an amazing guest with me. His name is Timothy. I'm so grateful to you, Timothy, for joining me today and agreeing to be my guest because I think you are so cool. Your look itself is what drew me to you to just have a chat and see what you were about. So tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really fun to be here with you. I know the last time we spoke, it was on the phone. So, yeah, just video does bring a nice extra layer. It's, nice to see you this time. So, and yeah, so I'm a channel, I'm a conscious channel. So, if you've ever heard of like Abraham Hicks, Bashar, I'm in that realm in terms of conscious channeling. And people often ask, well, what do you channel? And to me, it's just my own higher self or my own soul. We all have one. And every soul to me is a spark of, source divine consciousness. And so I'm just really relaxing into my own connection to all that is to source energy and speaking from that place. And it, edu- it educates me on wider perspectives from my life, but it also does that for others. And so what I mean by that is that a lot of times we get so narrow in our thinking and we get so fixed on like specifics, like shouldn't it go like this, or why is it happening like this? And that wider soul perspective is often like, well, what if you thought about it like this or that? And all of a sudden we widen out of our very narrow thinking. And a lot of times we can see situations in completely new ways. So channeling is really good for that, providing those perspectives. But then also the thing that I love most, and I do this both in my channeled sessions in the channeled state, but also in my own intuitive like empowerment coaching or transformation coaching, is taking people deep within themselves. Because a lot of times what I see is that people want like spirit or God or source consciousness just to say, tell me something I don't know. And honestly, like that is not where a lot of the answers are. Like, tell me something I don't know. Usually it's looking at the situations in our lives and the energy about those situations. So, meaning how we're showing up, our beliefs about the situations, our limiting beliefs in a lot of cases,
Mhm.
how we're holding ourselves back, how we're keeping ourselves small, dimming our light, not speaking our truth. These are a lot of the factors in the life situations that are causing them to be the way they are right now. So a lot of times people are like, hey, spirit, like God, tell me something I don't know. And that, what I find is that consciousness is like, no, let's go into your situations. Let's see your inner workings about the situations, because that's where the tweaks can be made, is with your own inner workings about your life situations. And when you see your limiting beliefs, when you see how you've been holding yourself back with, no shame or blame, but just seeing like, oh,
Yeah.
this is how I've been holding myself back, then you all of a sudden can behave and act differently in your life. And when we behave and act differently, all of a sudden new options open up. I mean,
Yeah.
for instance, I'll share that I just had one where, I'll vulnerably share that I'm a performer, and, I've studied acting for like 7 to 8 years in my life. And I have this internal story that, is there a place for me? Because I have these big stretched ears and my hair is very unique. And, I'm very attached to my beard. I wouldn't want to shave my beard. So
Right.
I have this internal story of like, is there a place for me in that world? And
Yeah.
it's funny. I was speaking to ChatGPT last night, and I was just telling it my limiting belief. And it was like, well, what if you just came at it from the perspective that your passion and your talent are enough and the
Yeah.
other stuff will just work itself out?
Yeah.
And I was just like laughing. I'm like, that's really wise. So, anyways, I do that a lot in my work, is I help people see it from that new perspective, which Chat GPT did for me. So I know I just shared a lot, but that gives you an idea.
Yeah, and it's so true because we do allow ourselves to get boxed into this one way of seeing things. And I actually just did a little video for my mindful musings this morning too, and I was talking about that exact thing, how we get ourselves in this little box, and what if we just push
Yeah.
out the walls? What if we just push
Yeah.
those out and make more room for all these possibilities and different ways that things can happen and be, and different ways that we can be? We don't
Mhm. Yeah.
have to keep ourselves so encapsulated in these small spaces. We get to stretch out.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so true. And just that slight, for me, again, it was just like, what if you consider that your passion and your talent are enough?
Yeah,
All of a sudden, it's like,
yeah, yeah, I'm enough, like right now in this moment. And that is a powerful message. It truly is a
yeah,
powerful message. So did it make you feel like, oh, I'm going to just like explore that and I'm going to start putting myself out there into these situations where maybe I can and do get these, uh, what would you call it, a gig or engagement or
a role.
a
Yeah.
role?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple things. I mean, there's a lot of things with performance I want to do that are my own, which I've been percolating on, and I have ideas and how I can begin to create, certain expressions of my own kind of performance things. So
Yeah,
there's that, which again, I have some good ideas that I can move forward on. But then also, yeah, it helped me kind of see that with a lot of these situations, it's just about like if you feel like you're a good fit for the role. So for instance, since we're getting into it, a lot of the roles that I've seen, they'll say, like a certain height, like this color hair, facial hair, blah, blah, blah. A lot of times they don't say anything about ears. So it's like you can just apply if it's a role of a husband, like who says the husband can't have stretched ears? Like,
right.
who says that's not okay? So like if I'm not applying because of my ears, well, that's only me holding myself back. I'm saying like I can't apply because
Yeah.
whereas the role doesn't say anything about that. It says, like 5'8", brown hair. Oh, that's me. So why wouldn't I apply?
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
if they don't like the ears, they don't like the ears. But usually, again, they're not so much worried about, they're really looking for a good fit, energetically speaking.
Yeah.
And, they're also looking at aesthetic things, like, do you fit with the rest of the cast? Like, oftentimes they are looking at things like that. Do you kind of like look good next to this other actor or actress? They do look at those things.
Mhm.
And of course, they're also like, are you going to be able to play the part well? Like, do you take direction well? There's all these other factors where they're looking for these things. But because we've been so programmed to kind of, hold ourselves back and limit ourselves, it can be as simple as something as small as like, oh, like my ears aren't okay. So I shouldn't even apply. And then that keeps us from taking any action. In this case, it keeps me from taking any action. So now all of a sudden I'm seeing it from like, why hold myself back? Why not just apply and see what happens?
Yeah, because as you're talking about it, I'm thinking, what if the person who's putting that information out there to seek a person for that role doesn't realize that your uniqueness could lend a whole nother dimension that they didn't even think about. So then you come in
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, that's actually perfect because it adds this extra element that I didn't even think about before. That would be so cool.
Mm. Getting chills as you're saying that because yeah, that's the way that creation works a lot of the time, right? Like even in visualization, we know this, like we picture it, but
Yeah.
we can't possibly entertain how it could be better, right? Like we're just like we're getting the visual that we're getting, and then we're like taught to release the visual so that the universe can enhance upon our vision and bring something in better. So yeah, they might be saying like this is the energy of the person, this is kind of how they look, but yeah, someone comes in and there's something so distinct about them that they're like, whoa, like
Yeah.
this is like another level that or layer that I couldn't even really, but it's cool and I like it. And all of a sudden, because I volunteered to say, well, I'm at least gonna put myself out there, and now someone else is saying, whoa, like never thought about this, but it's cool. It's now these two can meet up,
Yeah.
but they could only ever meet up if I stopped holding myself back.
Right. Exactly. That extra element is the magic they didn't even know they needed. It's awesome.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean that it definitely can work that way. And it's really good for me. That's what I love is I help people dive in deep to see like where are they holding themselves back?
Mhm.
Because we all do it. Like I'm sharing how I do it, how I've done it. And that was a big epiphany for me is that like getting hung up on this detail that tells me I can't or it won't work or I shouldn't try. And that's affecting my entire life. That's
Yeah.
affecting how I behave in my entire life. And so that's how I'm doing it in one example. And we all do that. And so just imagine the freedom that we could all find sometimes with these very just like, detailed stories of like, well, it wouldn't work because, but that's so limiting. Like, why? I just, I listened to this song by Selena Gomez this past week. It's called Who Says? And in the song, she says, like, who says you're not pretty? Who says you can't be in movies? Who says, who says?
Yeah.
And then you realize it's like, oh, maybe at some point someone else said it to us, like, you can't be in movies. And
Right.
so they kind of project a limitation onto us. If we accept it in that moment and we internalize it, and we go, I can't be in movies. Now we're doing it to ourselves. And
Yeah.
so, like, when she's saying, who says, I realize, like, oh, I'm saying, I'm saying.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
what if I didn't say? What if I stopped saying?
Yeah. And then that shifts everything. And then all of a sudden you're getting all these roles and stepping into this
Yeah.
amazing future that you just were disallowing yourself to have. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is enlightening. And I'm just bringing it to the table because I'm just hoping that other people might start to contemplate. Like, if you have a story of, you know, it's not for me, too big, like I'm asking for too much. That's
Yeah.
another aspect. As a teenager, I had this dream, but I felt like I was asking for too much. I actually had a lot of guilt as a teenager because when I was that age, I was in this community where like these, going off and like serving in third world countries was like really praised. And that's a beautiful thing if you're called to it. Like if that
Yeah.
lights you up and you really want to do that, it's a beautiful thing. However, that's not what was lighting me up. Like I was lit up by acting at that age. And so I also created this guilt narrative of like, oh, I shouldn't want that, or
Right.
because everyone else is doing like these noble things. And as a teenager, I hadn't ever done the work. I didn't know about the emotional work back then. So I just liked movies because they were fun and there was like an emotional connection. And of course, they have nice stories that like give us a boost sometimes. But back then I didn't realize how movies can help us have like really deep, profound insights into ourselves. It can help us along our healing path. It can help us see our own blocks when we see it in a character. It's doing all these wonderful things through storytelling. I didn't really get it back then, but I get it now because of all the work I've done. And now I'm like, oh, it is service because it's through these stories that people, that sometimes millions, even a billion people, are getting deeper insights into themselves, or they're seeing someone else be brave. They're
Yeah.
seeing someone else finally be themselves. And now a billion people are getting that message. So now I can see from this age, it is service. But
Hmm.
back then, I didn't see it as service. So I felt guilty because I was like, oh, like I shouldn't want that. But again, through life experience and the healing work, I'm like, it is service. It just
It is.
looks different.
It just looks different. Exactly. And that's such an important distinction. It's such an important
Mhm.
distinction because it's putting ourselves back in that box again where it has to look like this to
Yeah.
be valuable and you have to look like this to be worthy of it. And it's that's not at all true. We just create those limitations ourselves.
Yeah. And yeah, I just want to offer we don't need to have any shame or blame about it. It's just in these Western cultures, I always say, I always like to kind of like put in as a caveat, like, I don't know about indigenous cultures because I never grew up in one. So I don't know how they work. I do know in Western culture, we've just been programmed into a lot of limitation, a lot of like staying small. Who am I? Don't be too loud, don't be too visible, like all
Yeah.
these things. It's like, yeah, it's very like confined and stay small and just, like pay attention, all these things. And it is really limiting. And you can tell by the past, whatever, like 30, 40, 50 years, how it's not working to limit ourselves, confine ourselves, keep ourselves small, because just look at the evidence. Like, people are suffering, people are unhappy, people are tired of being small, they're tired of not being themselves, they're tired of being invisible, they're tired of not using their voice. And this is
Yes.
causing a lot of like repressed energy, which then you could argue turns into physical effects, from
Yeah.
all of this repressed energy. So in my perspective, clearly it's not working. So to really allow ourselves on the individual level to question these limitations so that we can then break free from them, it's like, it's a beautiful thing. I just saw an actress, a clip on the Today Show from an actress that was really famous in the 90s, and she was just saying, like now, like 30 years later, she's like, I'm finally the most I've ever been
Yeah.
me. I'm the most myself I've ever been. Like she said, back then I was kind of like playing to all these pop culture things that people loved about me. She's
Mhm.
like, but those were just roles. That wasn't really me. I was just kind of like, oh, people like this, I'll be this.
Yeah.
She's like, but now I'm like, now I'm me. Now I'm not trying to fill these roles and expectations. Now I'm me. And it happened, it sounds like it happened kind of later in life, but still, whenever we break free, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, it would be great if we could all have that realization real early on and just live our lives in that beautiful space of just being so comfortable in our skin, but it definitely doesn't always look like that. I know it didn't for me. It's been a journey. And how do you feel like we can create a safer space for people to be more willing to accept themselves in that deep and profound way and not cater to the outside influences so much?
Yeah, I like that question. So to me, vulnerability is really big. At least this is the way it's been for me, is that a lot of times these judgments, these stories, these narratives are just circling. They're on like a perpetual loop, a lot of
Hmm.
times in our head. And we're so convinced because we tell the story, we give it attention over and over and over again.
Hmm.
For me, I did find a lot of freedom when I finally was willing to open up in safe spaces and share like my self narrative. So sometimes that looked like soul family. Like I used to go to these cacao circles like in Los Angeles, and it was like a safe space where everybody was there just to be vulnerable, share their heart, share what's going on. And then other people in the space were just kind of like being encouraging, or, you know, do you have to look at it like that? Or, why are you so convinced this is true? So, just asking like insightful questions without judgment. That's the key, is like, to me, a safe space typically means that there's no judgment. People aren't going to make us wrong. So for me, it was like opening up in safe spaces like that. Sometimes it was just a weekend getaway with a few close friends that I knew were also on the same kind of like spiritual path as me. And I just knew they weren't going to judge. And it was just kind of like one of those things like, hey, I've never said this out loud before, but here's like something that's causing me to suffer a lot. And just, and the speaking it, like I was able to observe, like it's so heavy for me. And I was watching them listen to me, and I could see how they were like, this is only something that you're really doing to yourself.
Right.
I can laugh about it now, but I could see how my story that was so convincing to me sounded so strange to them. I could see it on their faces that they were like, you don't need to think this way about yourself. And
Uh,
again, I can laugh about it now because I'm just reflecting back on what that was like. But it was happy for me based on how I was shaping the narrative. But to them, they were just kind of like, you don't, you don't need to do this to yourself. And so, and then also, I did work with like coaches and people that are considered to be like spiritual healers, like in that kind of realm, and shared some big stuff with them. So for me, the pattern was getting it out in places that I felt safe, but speaking it so that others could help me question it.
right.
And when they helped me question it, all of a sudden it helped me, one, break the cycle, because if it's only circling on the inside over and over again, there's no like kind of like interrupt in the pattern. But all of a sudden speaking it, it's like it stops and then it
Right.
comes out instead of just circling inward. And when it comes out and another perspective, non-judgmental perspective, is allowed to kind of like maybe gently question it with love, all of a sudden it can kind of help the mind break out of that very narrow view and just be like, oh, oh, maybe there is another more loving, compassionate way to look at this.
Yeah.
And so I found a lot of freedom in that. And again, whether it was close friends, like, just a spiritual kind of like cacao circle coach, spiritual healer, it was when I really started to share those things and stop internalizing them so much that's when I began to break free. And again, none of those spaces were judgmental. They were all very compassionate, accepting, just curious. Never made me wrong, but they always just brought a curiosity of like, do you really need to keep seeing it like this? That kind of energy.
Right. Yeah. It makes a huge difference, doesn't it, when someone just comes to us with it could be better, just allow yourself
Yeah.
to see a different way of looking at it. And
Yeah.
it's so liberating to be able to shift your mindset like that. So I know you mentioned a few places. If someone
Mhm.
isn't familiar with those kinds of things, or they don't have those spiritual non-judgmental gifts in their life in the form of
Yeah.
friends, where would you suggest they go to find a place where they can have someone help them along the path, especially if they can't afford a coach? Because that really is an issue
Yeah.
for a lot of people.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's a good point. So I'm a big proponent of intuition. Like that's the way that I've lived my life for the past 10 years, is just really learning how to reconnect with my intuition. So the reason I bring that up is that if you just have a natural draw towards something, it
Hmm.
could just be, it could even just be maybe like a holistic therapist that you see on Instagram. Because a lot of these, what I'm seeing in a lot of therapists is they are becoming much more holistic. And they actually, there's a lot of actually like spiritual therapists now, that are really widening the way that they look at things. So it could even be just if you find like someone on like Instagram and you're just drawn to their messages, you're just naturally like pulled in, like, oh, just every time they speak, it's like just something about it. Like, I feel better. It helps me see things. Just even something like that. If you're naturally drawn towards just a certain kind of wisdom that you just feel in your body, you feel really good about. Like to
Yeah.
me, that's a clue. It's just a clue. And I would just, if it were me, I would just say like honor your clues. I mean, when I started this like 10, 13 years ago, I was actually going to the library at the time and I was borrowing audio CDs, that were like in the self-help or spirituality, because I was driving around a lot in Los Angeles, and so I would just pop in a CD and I would just pay attention of all the different options that were on the shelf. I'm like, like which one is like most intriguing to me? Which one is like most just like pulling me in? And sometimes it was based on the title or maybe like a picture of the author and just the messaging, but I would just pay attention to which pulled me the most, and I
Mhm.
would grab it, borrow it, pop in those CDs. And that was the beginning for me, and it was free, like absolutely free. It was just by going. And I know the library still has, I mean, these days, not only does it have books that you can actually read, but now a lot of libraries have ebooks that you can just borrow from your smartphone. It
Yeah.
has a lot of them have networks where you can borrow audiobooks on your smartphone and just download the audiobook for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's where I started, and it was all free. Like, I mean, I remember saying to myself, like, just that there's so much information, and a lot of it you can just get by going to the library.
Yeah.
I mean, now we have YouTube and there's so much more. Like back then, there wasn't as much on YouTube. There was some stuff, but
Right.
there's so much on YouTube. I'll just say be discerning, like just be
Yes.
discerning. Like I feel our body is speaking, and like if we have a weird off feeling about certain information or a certain person, I feel like it's another clue. So
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of trusting yourself. And I know that's a practice. It's really easy to say trust yourself. And sometimes we do learn by kind of not really paying attention to our intuition
Mm.
and kind of like leaning into something and then maybe like 10 or 20 steps down the road, all of a sudden there's a big red flag and we're like,
Yeah.
oh, oh, this avenue is definitely not for me.
Yeah.
um because it probably was there on the intuitive level in the beginning, but we might not have noticed. So I'm just saying this again so to offer grace, because as much as our intuition is always there, I feel it's always there, sometimes maybe we're not paying attention, and so we do get pulled down an avenue that maybe we won't notice a red flag until, like, again, 20 steps down the road. But once we notice a red flag, again, to me that's a clue to be like, okay, maybe not.
Yeah.
So discernment is a big part of it, and only you know yourself, inside and out. Like nobody else knows you the way you do. And so your relationship to your intuition will also be unique. I'm really good with what mine feels like, and I really pay attention and I listen. But again, we're talking about like 10 years of practice on my end. So that's why it may really sound easy for me.
Hmm.
But again, I did have a lot of experiences where I didn't listen in the beginning. I wasn't really connected in the beginning, and all of a sudden 20 steps later, there's a huge red flag, and I'm like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
letting this one go. So I learned through life experience too, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I feel like life experience is a great teacher if we,
Yeah.
especially if we pay more attention, because we'll see those
Yeah.
things come up, like I've had that in my life too, where things will come up and I don't really believe that we get tested. I know a lot of people use that terminology. I don't really feel that way, but I do feel like sometimes our lessons are revisited because I feel like sometimes the universe is going, okay, you've seen this before. Are you going to do something differently this time? If you're going to do something differently,
Mm-hmm.
what are you going to do differently to create a different outcome for that same kind of scenario? So
Mm-hmm.
it's really, really cool how it all works when you're paying attention, when you allow yourself to look at it from your higher self at more of a bird's eye view perspective instead of this narrow little box that
Mm-hmm.
this shit feels like crap right now, you know,
Yeah.
it makes a big difference.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that many times before, that life is cyclical. It's a kind of the way just reality, if you will, works, is it's very cyclical. And yeah, because we're always changing from the inside. So again, a book or a movie could completely change the way that we see certain situations. So now we're a new person because we see certain things differently. So yeah, when a similar situation comes along, we're a new person now. And so because we can see it differently, we may react, respond, behave very differently. And because we behave, react, or respond differently, like you said, now there's a new outcome, because maybe the circumstance, the stimuli is familiar, but we're different.
Right.
And when we're different, a lot of times we realize we have new choices. And so the new choices, like you said, can create new outcomes.
Absolutely. So I'd like to revisit your channeling thing because we did touch on that in the very beginning. And tell us more about that. How did you realize that you are a channel? And when did you decide? How long did it take you before you decided to kind of step into the light regarding channeling? Because I know that's like there's so many different spiritual avenues that people can take, and it's all beautiful to me. I love it. That's one of the things I love about doing this podcast because I get to explore some of that with people. But it seems like channeling is the one thing that makes people either scratch their head, roll their eyes, or they're completely fascinated by it because it's something that's a little bit different than everything else in the realm of spirituality. So I'd love to hear a little more
Mhm.
about your journey with that.
Yeah, yeah, happy to. So first and foremost, I'll say that it's something that everybody can do, because I'm gonna get really, what's the word here? I'm really gonna kind of invite us to go really wide here, and maybe think about things in a way that you've never thought about them before. And this is just the way it makes the most sense to my human mind, if you will.
Mhm.
So we're all existence, and existence is just everything that exists. And existence is energy and it's information. This body is made of anywhere. I used to work in holistic wellness, and when I was in that field, I used to hear that the body was made of anywhere from 50 to 100 trillion cells at any given point. you know smaller than cells, we have like atoms and molecules and all of that. So, but it's all vibrating energy.
Mhm.
And so essentially, this body is a tuning fork. And once I realize this is a tuning fork, all of a sudden it's like, oh, like this body can tune to different states, different ability to receive information. And so there is an overarching intelligence to all of life. And, sometimes people call that God or source or creator, but there's an overarching intelligence that's informing everything. All the cells know what to do because of this intelligence. And so that intelligence is there and it's willing to offer information, and because it is that expanded overarching view, that view of all of life, everything that's happening, because it's so big, it's so vast. It's like we say things like God or source, but it's really so vast you can't even conceive how big it is, because it's aware of everything, like every cell on every planet,
That's
every
incredible.
universe. It's aware of all of it. It's aware of all of it. So of course it has perspectives that our mind doesn't, because
Right.
our mind's only looking at this room, or it's reflecting on our life experience, which is only like that much of existence.
Yeah.
Whereas the overarching intelligence, God or source, if you will, sees everything. It's aware of all of it. So again, of course, it's going to have wider perspectives that our minds never considered before. So the body as a tuning fork can tune itself into this all-encompassing intelligence. And so some people call it like, angels or guides. Like to me, I just say it's my higher self, my soul, because my soul is a piece of that overarching intelligence. It's connected to that. It's a part of that. So by tuning into my wider perspective, my soul, it can offer those things that my mind's never considered before, because it knows how life works. So I just learned or remembered, you could say, that my body is a tuning fork and I can tune into that wider soul perspective. And I can speak from that place, and that place feels like my heart.
Mm.
You'll often hear in a lot of teachings that the heart is considered to be the seat of the soul, that
Yeah.
it has an electromagnetic field that is way bigger than the brain. I've often heard that it extends 6 to 8 feet outside the body from the heart space. So it's a big deal in our body, and that's why I feel it's often referred to as the seat of the soul, because it's just most people hear that calm, wise, still small voice intelligence usually in their heart or maybe closer to their gut, but it's in the body.
Right.
And so I just recognize that I can tune into that, and I can like really relax into that space and speak from that place. So you could say that the body now is a tuning fork tuned into that kind of wisdom, and I know how to let the wisdom flow through kind of uninhibited. The mind's not so much in the way anymore because I'm really tuned into the heart, if you will. So all that to say is it's something that we can all do, because we all have these tuning fork bodies. We all have a soul, or an eternal consciousness, if you will. And my journey just looked like, in the beginning, I just learned how to listen to my heart in conversations when I was hearing people, and I would just speak from my heart. And people would say things like, how did you know that's the exact thing that I needed to hear right now? And I was like, oh, it was just the most clear thing from my heart to say. Like I was just listening to my heart as you were speaking, and that was just the most apparent thing to say. And they were like, oh my gosh, it's like so perfect right now.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how it started, when I learned how to like hear my heart as I was listening, as opposed to like being in my head.
Yeah.
Uh, from there, in some of these cacao circles, because cacao is said to be, it's said to be like a heart medicine. If you're speaking like South American terminology, they just call it, like in South America, oftentimes it's referred to as like a heart medicine. So like, or a heart expander is another word to say. Like it just has certain properties that, again, it's physical matter, our heart's physical matter. It's just known to help expand the heart. And I've even heard that some of the actual properties of cacao actually widen the blood vessels in the heart. And
Hmm.
so I've actually heard that it literally is expanding the heart because the blood vessels are getting wider. Like I've heard that kind of like scientific terminology. And so in a lot of those experiences, I was even more in my heart, and everybody in the room is dropping into their heart. So when everyone's in their heart, like the whole room becomes more. connected, if you will.
Oh.
And in those spaces, like it just started happening naturally where I would just feel messages, from the heart space for the room. And as I expressed them to the room, people were just like, whoa, this is so impactful right now. This is so valuable. It's so meaningful to my life. And so that just kind of boosted my confidence that, like, oh, and people would say, like, this is a thing for you. Like, people would say, like, you're meant to do this. You're really good at this. So, like, just people would keep saying, like, this is a thing for you. It also showed up in a lot of plant medicine experiences, and it got even stronger there.
Hmm.
And once it got into a certain point where like the messages were just so coming through with such like power and force that I decided, like, oh, this is something that I want to take out of these kind of like really amazing circles with other people, and I want to bring it into everyday life. And when I made that choice, I was exposed to other people that were doing it professionally, and I kind of got to see how they were doing it. That gave me even more confidence to be like, oh, if they're doing it, like, I can do it.
Yeah.
And then I just started reaching out to friends, and I would just, in the beginning, I was like, hey, would you let me provide a session for you? And they'd be like, sure. And the first two times I did it for people, they were pretty blown away. They said, whoa, you have no idea how much this information is helping my life right now. And both people said, could I please pay you? They're like, this has been phenomenal. And so I was just like, sure. So that's how it all started for me.
That's amazing. And how long from when you first realized that you were channeling till you started putting yourself out there? Was that a long time or?
Just reflecting on the timeline right now. So yeah, I feel like this probably started about, like 6 to 7 years ago. Like that's when I started in conversations, just like saying what was on my heart. And people like, oh, it's so perfect. And so from there to professionally, yeah, probably about, yeah, 3 to 3.5 years until I, was like doing it professionally. So yeah, there was definitely like a warm up period, you could say.
So are you only doing this as individual sessions for people, or are you putting yourself on your own like YouTube platform or other platforms so that you are doing this more for the collective? Integrating some of the crazy things that are happening in our climate and talking about those things. What is it that your vision is for this channeling?
Mm. Yeah, I've done a lot of one-to-one. I've also done a number of like group things, whether in person or virtually. Like I've definitely done this for groups as well. And yeah, I do have what I call like sample messages, that are accessible online for people just to, because sometimes people, yeah, like you said, they're like, what is this? And so it
Hmm.
gives people a chance to see it and to also hear, because a lot of times people get caught up in the visual because I understand what it's like for the human mind to see something that's different and not understand. So for a lot of people, like their eyes are closed, sometimes their head's a bit back, like mine is. And a lot of times there is a very strong voice, like there's a very strong presence of, that is being spoken from. So it does look very different.
Hmm.
And again, I get how the mind can be like, what's going on here? Like, I've never seen anything like this. And so that's why I have examples. Cause, like, yes, in the beginning, like, it may look different and the mind might be like, I don't understand, but it's really not about the presentation. It's about the message. So, like, if the presentation is really distracting, again, I get it, but that's not personally what I'm like, what's the message and how does the message feel? Like, how does it feel in my body? Like, does it resonate with me? Because again, everything is energy. And again, as far as I'm concerned, this body is a tuning fork. So even information, like if the information's coming in, it's in my perception, it's trying to see if it resonates with you. Like everything's trying to line up. And that's why when we say it doesn't resonate, that means like something, a person, a situation, an opportunity is coming in to say, like, can I harmonize with you? And
Hmm.
if it's not harmonizing with us, we're just like, no, doesn't feel right.
Right.
And so if something is harmonizing with you, whether it's a person, information, it's just like, oh, this just feels good. It just feels like a match. Like I enjoy the way this feels. To me, that's just a sign that it's harmonizing. So if information is harmonizing with you, again, I pay attention to that. If it feels weird or like, oh, I just don't like something about this, then I'm like, no, thank you. And I like let it go on its way. But I do have the visual samples, if you will. So people can see it because people obviously are going to see it, but also like just get a sense of the information. Like, does the information resonate with you? And I mean, at this point, what it's doing is that I'm so aware of these perspectives because I've been tuning in not only to my own, like higher self or soul wisdom, but I also study the works of other really phenomenal people doing this, like, Daryl Anka, like Esther Hicks. And I've been, listening to those perspectives too. And I've really taken a lot of perspectives and applied them in my own life so I could get my own evidence. Like, does the wisdom work?
Right.
Because to me, it's great to have the wisdom, but doesn't really make a difference in everyday life. And so I apply all of it, whether it's coming from me or Esther or Daryl. And now I have a lot of real life experience based on applying the wisdom. And so that's my big thing now is actually just sharing a lot of my life experience based on these expanded wisdom approaches, if you will. So like they're kind of incorporated in everything I do now, whether it's, a written post or a video. Like I do my best to be an example of someone who's being their authentic selves. You mentioned the hair. I've always loved my hair being like that. I didn't find the permission to cut my hair like that until I was 25. I'm
Mhm.
41 now, but I always liked it. I liked it since I was like 8 years old. And so me just, like saying, well, this is how I like my hair to me it is like, it's kind of like an example in itself. Like this is me being me.
Right.
And I reflected back a number of years ago when I was like more in person with people in a different role. And I remember there were two people that, they were coming into this establishment and all of a sudden I noticed their hair was like also like a mohawk and mine was too at the time because this was not that long ago, maybe like, like 8 years ago or something. And I said like, oh, like your hair looks really cool. And both these people said, they said, well, you inspired me.
Oh, check that out. That's so cool.
And so I did my best to live it, to
Yeah.
like, I'm talking about being more yourself. So I do my best to be my authentic self as much as possible. And if I
Yeah.
have any limitations where I'm holding back, I do my best to like dig in and investigate and where can I break free even more, so that people can see that like yes, it's great to know the information, but to me, the real transformation and power comes from applying it. So I also just do my best to be a living example of this wisdom of following my heart, listening to my intuition, being myself, trusting myself. These are some of my core things. And so I just do my best to live it and let it reflect in everything I do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I love that. And I feel like when we are ourselves, we kind of, without even realizing or any effort goes into it, that we're creating this safe space for other people to also be themselves. Like you inspired those two guys to cut their hair into a mohawk. That's really, and I mean,
Yeah.
who knows how long they've thought about doing it. And then they're like, there's that dude and he did it. So I think it'd be cool for us to
Yeah.
do. Let's just, I mean, and at the end of the day, it's hair. You know what I mean? It can grow back really quickly, or you can buzz the rest of it off and just be back to a buzz cut. But I mean, so it's really cool that you did that and that they were so inspired just by you allowing yourself to step into your full authentic selves. Cause I feel like so many of us aren't brave enough to do that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, this is just another way, like by having conversations like this, I'm imparting the wisdom and my own life experience of following the wisdom. So again, like my look is based on me finding the permission to be myself, like the ears too. And I
Yeah.
shared, like I'm having a human experience. So I shared vulnerably that like, hey, like I also have this other dream that has to do with performing
Yeah.
and look at how I've been holding myself back. Uh, so I like to share my own life experience. Like, yes, I've found freedom in all these ways, and yes, currently I'm also saying this is how I've held myself back. So it's like, again, being aware of the wisdom is really great, but digging into it and talking about it in real life circumstances, like I love doing that. And so just having this conversation with you is another way where I'm like, I know all this wisdom and it's really great for me. And it's also like, here's how it is actually working in my real life. Either here's
Yeah.
how I found freedom, or here's how I've actually seen that I'm holding myself back. So now I'm at a crossroads and
Yeah.
I get to, like we said, life is cyclical. I'm at a crossroads because now I'm more aware. I'm like, oh, what will I do now with this new awareness? To
Yeah.
me, that's the game that we're all in. What will I do now with this new awareness?
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a
Yeah.
difference. It's so important to realize that. So I absolutely love that. So where do you see this going? This, what is your big dream? I mean, are you gonna pursue, do you want to like do channeling in your acting, or what do you see for yourself?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, that's another good one. So it's funny that you say that because I watch a lot of interviews with actors, like well-known actors, and I see it because I've studied it myself. I studied it for like 7 years in Los Angeles and like another year in Colorado virtually. Uh, so I have like my own experience with that, but then I also have like all this other like metaphysical stuff that we've been talking about. And I've heard like other actors say that like that's what they see themselves doing. Like they are essentially channeling the essence of a character and
Mm,
they see themselves as a conduit for this persona, like to basically express through them, like in this story. And so they do see themselves as a channel in that way. So it's funny that you said that because it's like it makes perfect sense. It's like, yeah, just allowing a certain frequency or essence to express itself, on film, right? Even if it's like digital to express itself to be a part of a story. And they allow like this frequency of this character to like express again tuning fork, right?
yeah.
And so I definitely see a lot of potential there because they're tuning into like who is this character? Like how are they, in conversation? How are they in this scene? Like they're tuning into it, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely see a lot of potential for that because of how I've just allowed myself to see myself as a tuning fork. Like now that I know that, I'm like, oh, like I could totally see myself as, just allowing different characters. Uh, so there is that, which I'm very aware of. But then also, I talked about how I have my own kind of ideas about expressing myself in just ways that have never quite been seen before. And so I do have a vision that has to do with like, I mean, the way I've ultimately seen it, like it's right now, it's a vision. I really don't know how it happens. We're not supposed to know the how. We're
Right.
invited to hold the vision. We're invited to hold the vision and then watch for the breadcrumbs or also take inspired action when it shows up. So right now it's a vision, and I do have a vision of a live traveling show that is storytelling, and it's storytelling in the essence of who we truly are.
Hmm.
Again, like whether you call it like I said, we're all existence, we're all intelligent loving existence. That's one way I like to look at it. Some people say we're the divine, like we're the sacred, we're all one. So it's in that lane, but really just demonstrating that, yeah, like it's all energy taking effect in different shapes or forms. So like we really are all the same thing and we have all this potential because through our imagination, we can invite in living. Planes didn't exist until people started to imagine them. So there is a real connection between what is imagined and what comes into reality. Not
Yes.
every imagination does, but a lot of them that were
Thankfully, right?
focused upon. Yeah, yeah, thankfully. Yeah, because some of them, if you're not focusing in the right way, if you're not focusing in a pleasing way, it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
wouldn't be favorable for that to come into form. But and the ones that are pleasing, the ones that like enhance our lives, like planes, and imagination, those were focused upon over and over and over, which
Right.
sparked ideas, which sparked experimentation. And because that vision was focused on for such a long period of time and actually taken inspired action upon, now the whole world is different. Like we can cross an ocean from 35,000 feet, it's like,
Yeah.
so just really remind the whole intention of me is reminding people who we are, that there really is limitless potential in the sense that we only would ever know if we allow ourselves to expand, we allow ourselves to try, we allow ourselves to step into new possibilities as those cycles come around. So,
Yeah.
one, just reminding people who we are, that yes, we are all the same thing. We're all energy, infinite energy expressing itself in a myriad of ways. We do have endless potential because who knows until we try. And then also just, there's a healing aspect to this vision because it is just reminding people that we're loved
Yeah.
and that we're supported, and that the invitation really is like, once you can see yourself for who you really are, that you are existence, that you're loved. Otherwise, why would you be here? I mean, like, we're on this planet and we have all these, like, to me, it's pretty clear again when we step outside kind of like conventional thinking, we're here on this planet as these bodies, and look at all the resources that are here to support us:
Yeah.
oceans, rivers, mountains that we get all these minerals from,
Yeah.
and deposits that we build technology from, like, all the plantation and the fruit and the vegetable, like all these things. Clearly, life is supporting the fact that we exist. And
Right.
to me, that's an indicator of great love. And so another aspect is just reminding people that we're loved. And once we really get that we're loved and we're supported and that life wants us here, to me, that's a really beautiful place to start stepping into more of that potential. Because now we're not in that, like, you know, feeling sorry that we exist, or,
Yeah.
questioning, am I supposed to be here? Like, I'm not judging any of that. I just know from firsthand experience that kept me in a very like small, scared, limited space.
Yeah.
And I wasn't living in potentials because I was feeling bad about myself. And
Right.
it wasn't until I was able to remember how loved and supported and intelligent that life is that I started to step out of that space of feeling bad about myself. And that's when I began to let myself live into more potentials. So the last kind of element is just reminding people that, like, hey, you're loved, and look at all of the support that life has for all of us.
Yeah.
Look at the endless potentials based on past experience. Airplanes,
Yeah.
um, skyscrapers that I don't even know, they're I don't even know how tall they are anymore, but they're pretty
They're
tall.
pretty dang
It's like,
tall.
yeah, it's like just reminding people like we're loved, and the invitation on the table is like, hey, explore your potential and see what
Yeah.
you find. So that's the gist of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that message. It's so good. It's so good. I really appreciate you sharing your journey and your vulnerability with the things that you shared with us today, because I know that's going to inspire someone. I know it is, because we've all been there, right? Every single one of us, we don't start out being spiritual gurus, if we should even use that term, what I mean? But we don't start out like with all the knowledge. We start out as babies and we have to grow and learn, and it's beautiful that you shared your journey with us, and I know your words have been inspiring to someone today, so I truly appreciate you. Do you have any last words that you'd like to share with us today before we close out?
Well, thank you again so much for this. This has been really fun, and thank you for letting me
You're very welcome.
express all of this. Yeah, it's really cool. This conversation has been different than any of the other, like, guest appearances I've done. It's really cool to see how this one has formulated itself. So thank you, because that's because of you, because you're bringing like your angle, and I love your kind of like free form approach. So thank you for the way that you've helped shape this and co-create this. And the last thing I'll just offer is that so you just mentioned spiritual guru, and I know a lot of this is looked at as spirituality, a lot of things we've been talking about. And I'll just offer one little tidbit here, because I've looked at the works of Bashar a lot, which is, channeled by Daryl Anka. And one of the things that comes through in those teachings, because, these teachings are, basically said to be coming from an enlightened race, like off planet. And essentially what they're saying is that, like, we're not here to teach you spirituality. We're just here to teach you how existence works. you
Mhm.
know, that it's energy, energy takes form, imagination is a big part of energy taking form
Yeah.
because we have preference in this situation. So I love that they're coming in. They're like, I know you look at a lot of this as spiritual, but we're here to say, like, this is just how existence or reality works.
Mhm.
Uh, and that was really cool for me too, because I feel like it really is kind of like a next step to go, like, it's fine to call it spirituality. However, I do like the next level of like, this is just how reality works.
Yeah, it's so, oh man, it's going to be so interesting to see if we get any response to that statement because I can see where you're coming from with it. And I
Yeah.
don't discount it at all. I think it's very valid to look at it from that perspective. It's just really interesting because we tend to want to call, I guess we want to call things these softer terms so that we feel more comfortable and safe in that space, and when you say just like this is just the way it is, it kind of feels like, whoa, that's a little bit not quite as warm, you know what I mean, as calling it spirituality. Do you know what I mean? Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
It does. Yeah, I see that. And yeah, I mean, I definitely see what you're saying. And I guess the reason that it feels so like uplifting and empowering to me is because like science is catching up with,
Yeah.
scientific study is catching up with this stuff. It's catching up with, like there's a quantum field, like a formless quantum field below all matter. Like I forget his name. I think it's David Lynch. Um, he he was I'm pretty sure that's the name, David Lynch. He was like a director for a long time, and then he got pulled into meditation, and he like started this TM, transcendental meditation kind of like institute. And I
Hmm.
remember seeing a video of him teaching once. He was kind of teaching on a, what do you call it, like a dry erase board, and he was basically saying, so this is like third hand what I'm repeating right now, but I've seen this show up in a lot of other places where essentially there is this quantum field that's been identified that's below all matter. So if you go down to the atom, molecule, all that stuff, like, and you just keep going down, like I've heard it said many times that below all of that, they've just found a formless field that's
Space.
intelligent.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just space. There's
Yeah.
actually nothing there. I mean, I've listened to that too. Dr. Joe Dispenza is one of the people who talks about
Yeah.
that. And it's
Yeah.
it's really super fascinating. It truly is. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, getting deep into that. Like we could have a whole nother podcast about that. I'll have to have you back. We'll have to go down another rabbit hole.
Yeah.
That would be
Yeah.
awesome. So wow, what a
Yeah. I mean,
profound thing to leave people with today. Holy cow.
yeah, that was all just to say that, again, like the scientific study is showing that there's just a field of intelligence, and like it's the intelligence that's giving everything its form. That's all that was to say, is like this is just being seen now that all of this is taking form based on intelligence. And as you just said, the intelligence is invisible.
Yeah, it is. It's so cool. I love it. Thank you so much
Yeah.
again, Timothy. I really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing all this. And I think that was a great thing to come back and land on before we close out today. Please share your thoughts in the comments about that one. That would be really awesome to hear. So, thank you again, Timothy. I do appreciate you so much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of Spiritually Speaking. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Comment, drop an emoji, like, share, subscribe. I think I already said that. I'm saying it again. And we will see you on the next one. As always, I love you all.